So there was Donald Trump face to face with a man who's pretty high on his rather long hate list. What happened?
Well, as you said, they confronted each other in court for the first time. In fact, Michael Cohen spent time giving testimony this morning, and they recently just broke up for lunch with Donald Trump protesting that he's not worried because Michael Cohen, who worked very closely with him for years, Trump said was a proven liar with a horrible record, and therefore, Trump had nothing to worry about. But I don't think that's quite true. That said, Michael Cohen did have to defend the fact that he'd already been found guilty of various tax evasions, and he had to sort of cop it to lying about the number of times that Trump that he'd spoke about the times that he'd had meetings about Trump Tower in Moscow. He claimed that he had to admit to lying to Congress, so that wasn't so good for Michael Cohen. The only thing is, Michael Cohen made it absolutely clear that every time he lied, he did it on behalf of his then client Donald Trump.
Yes, and there they were then. Michael Cohen on the witness stand, Donald Trump sitting at that bench, I presume, with his lawyers around him. And what was it like in the courtroom?
Well, I think everybody was waiting to see whether, fisticuffs would break out almost, such as the level of sort of crackling tension between the two men. Trump is having to be on his best behavior to some extent because he's already fallen foul of the judge in this case, Judge Engeron, for putting horrible information about the judge's legal clerk on his website. So he's been threatened with jail if he continues to malign people like that and intimidate people. So, but people were expecting, I think, a bit more of a sort of Godfather scene, where the mafia and mafia rat, which of course Trump alleges that Michael Cohen is the rat, where a rat has to confront some very intimidating people in the courtroom. But I think it wasn't quite as cinematic as that, to be honest.
Still sounds pretty dramatic. And meanwhile, there are other cases aplenty going on, aren't there, Sarah? In that, well, just to name one of them, that election interference case in Georgia. Sidney Powell, Trump's former lawyer, she struck a deal. Could be she's giving evidence against Trump, which could be dangerous, couldn't it?
It could be. And there's been more news, breaking news just today as well. Jenna Ellis, one of Trump's lawyers and so-called member of his elite strike force, has also pleaded guilty and struck a deal and went down condemning Trump's lawyers and bad advice from them. She didn't quite attack the president, but basically, the people that have been indicted in Georgia are turning tail. There are 3 lawyers now, including Ken Chesbrough, who probably had the best reputation of the bunch, have all pleaded guilty. And I think there'll be more twists and turns in that case to come. So, and Michael Cohen has been citing what happened to him, having his reputation traduced, going to jail for some time, as an example of what happens to people who work for Trump. That they get burned as he did. He's been very clear about that. So the incentive is there for people to plead guilty and try and strike a lesser sentencing deal.
And give evidence against Trump. Just in a nutshell, Sarah, between the cases we mentioned here and others besides, is the feeling that Donald Trump may actually end up behind bars in the run-up to this, to the full-on campaigning in the presidential election?
Well, firstly, I think it's incredibly unlikely that anybody would put Donald Trump behind bars in the run-up to an election. And so far, the people who have pleaded guilty to various offences, the 3 lawyers that I've mentioned, have got off with pretty light slaps on the wrist, small fines, apologies to the people of Georgia, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Now, of course, Trump hates to admit anything like that, but I've been to some extent surprised at the light sentences for these plea deals. And of course, the 2024 election is coming galloping into view. And whether there's really time to send Donald Trump to jail, even if he's found guilty, or then is a moot point, because I'm sure he'll appeal.
Oh, I'm sure that's also true. But the fact that the prosecutors are giving lighter sentences to people who are turning over and turning on Donald Trump doesn't necessarily mean, does it, that he can expect light treatment if he turns out to be found guilty?
Well, no, I mean, it would be interesting if he's finally the last person standing in these sprawling cases as the only one who's refusing to accept any guilt. But then his technique is to blame bad advice on all these other lawyers who let him down. So anything can happen. I'd be very reluctant to say that he's going to jail. I have seen other commentators make this point that it's now looking like the odds are stacked against him. But I think we've been down that road before. I'd say that's very premature.